ethnic studies in high school. Some want to make it mandatory. But do these studies really provide better education, or is it a form of political indoctrination? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. This month, kids are heading back to school. What will high school students be learning? Algebra? Shakespeare? Or how systems of power can be analyzed using the 4 I's of oppression? A few years from now, that might be part of the required ethnic studies curriculum in California. This bill, if passed, would make California the first state to make ethnic studies a requirement to graduate from high school. Other states like Indiana, Kansas, Arizona, Texas, Oregon, among others, offer ethnic studies classes too, but they offer it as an elective. California wants to make it mandatory, and that's not all. The proposed ethnic studies curriculum California is pitching is so far left that even California's liberal media are expressing concern. So what exactly is ethnic studies? According to the proposed curriculum, it's the interdisciplinary study of race, ethnicity, and indigeneity with an emphasis on experiences of people of color in the United States. The idea is that to better understand the history of the U.S., students need to be aware of the plight of the various minority subgroups, and that their contributions are just as valid as those of the mostly white European majority. I mean, that sounds reasonable. Why would anyone be against having kids learn about the contributions of minorities? Well, that's not what they're against. Critics are actually concerned that this ethnic studies curriculum is less about education and more about indoctrination. For example, topics may include colonization, militarization, social movements, and immigration, and the intersectionality and interrelatedness of distinct forms of social oppression in the United States, including anti-Semitism and anti-Arabism, adultism, ageism, ableism, classism, heterosexism, homophobia, racism, sexism, and transphobia. Students will learn useful vocabulary such as Misogynoir, prejudice directed towards black women; Positionalities, the social and political context of why you're prejudiced towards black women; and cis-hetero-patriarchy, which is why we live in a system where people like you are able to oppress black women and everyone else. Unless you, dear viewer, are not a cisgendered straight male, in which case I'm really sorry for including you in my previous sentence. Now obviously I didn't learn about any of this important stuff when I went to high school in California. I was mainly focused on not getting hit in the face with a dodgeball. Hey, take that down. That Shutterstock image is clearly a metaphor for how black people are oppressed by the yellow race. Wait, can I say yellow race? Dear Asian viewers, I'm really sorry for saying yellow race in my previous sentence. Anyway, how did this new ethnic studies curriculum come about? Well, back in 2016, California lawmakers passed a bill requiring the State Board of Education to develop an ethnic studies curriculum to serve as a guide. The various school districts could then use it to develop their own plans catering to the needs of the students they serve. California's growing population is changing in its ethnic makeup. So proponents argued ethnic studies would give students the skills and tools they need to deal with all this additional diversity. And a committee of high school teachers and college professors chosen by the California Department of Education went to work. They came up with the Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum. Now obviously, some people see this plan as a way to bring a progressive social justice agenda into our schools. Others see it as a plan to bring a progressive social justice agenda into our schools. Williamson M. Evers, who served as Assistant Secretary of Education under President George W. Bush, calls it a handbook for classroom propagandizing. He says this kind of lingo might be fine at the university level, but doesn't mean much to the regular folks who send their children to California's public schools. Historically speaking, ethnic studies as a field began to appear in U.S. colleges and universities in the 1960s. The push was triggered by growing social unrest on the campuses of UC Berkeley and what was then San Francisco State College. After multiple protests, tear gas, and strikes, the usual staples of the 60s, students on campus got the schools to create new curricula focused on marginalized communities and taught by people of color. This led to university degrees in new fields, like Chicano/Latino studies, Native American studies, and so on, which explore the history and experiences of those minority groups and how they interrelate in society. In the following decades, advocates moved to include ethnic studies at the high school and even elementary school levels. In some states, though, there has been pushback to keep these topics out of K-12 schools. In Arizona, for example, communities were concerned over how some of the courses dealt with Mexican-American issues. So in 2011, the state passed a law that authorized the state superintendent to stop any ethnic studies classes that advocate ethnic solidarity instead of the treatment of students as individuals. That law was later declared unconstitutional in late 2017. Subsequent research by the National Education Association found that both students of color and white students benefit academically as well as socially from ethnic studies. On the other hand, that research was funded by the teachers' union, so take it as you will. At any rate, a lot of high schools continue to offer ethnic studies as electives. But how popular are they? In Indiana so far, apparently, not very. Last year, Indiana included ethnic studies as part of its high school offerings. But in its first semester, some districts reported not a single student signed up. And in January of last year, the Indiana Online Academy for high school classes also began offering ethnic studies courses. Almost 9 months later, the spokesperson reported that no students have signed up. I'm a little disappointed that ethnic studies hasn't gone on. I was looking forward to a whole new genre of ethnic studies high school movies, like Z's All That, or 10 Positionalities I Hate About You. But remember, in Indiana, as well as the other states that offer it, you have a choice. California wants it to be a requirement. Clearly, if it's unpopular, the solution is to force people to sign up. But the criticism of the California plan has more to do with the content and wording of the proposed curriculum than the fact that it's mandatory. And the California curriculum is not necessarily the same as the ethnic studies curriculum in other states, even if it's called the same thing. The liberal-leaning Los Angeles Times editorial board calls California's proposal jargon-filled and all too PC. The paper criticizes the way the topics are approached, saying they only cover one side of the issue and don't really encourage discussion, that it feels like an exercise in groupthink, designed to proselytize and inculcate more than to inform and open minds. Here's an example for a group exercise on voting rights for non-citizen and undocumented immigrant residents in a school district. Last year, San Francisco allowed illegal immigrants to vote in school board elections. The California course proposal explores expanding those voting rights even further. If students decide they want to advocate for voting rights for undocumented immigrant residents at the school district or city elections, they can develop arguments in favor of such a city ordinance. Keyword, in favor. It doesn't say develop arguments against. The fear is students who may disagree with what's presented may not feel comfortable expressing their views. And if they disagree, does that mean they fail the assignment? The curriculum also recommends incorporating ethnic studies into other subjects. For example, a geography teacher might develop a unit or lesson around urban geography, where students can delve into key concepts like environmental racism and ecological justice. Which is good because the ethnic studies curriculum would, most likely, replace a semester of geography. I mean, do you really need to know where Mexico is? And ethnic studies doesn't stop at geography. The curriculum also points out that in math, there are courses such as Am I an Ethnic Statistic? Can you calculate 29% of 327 million? That's how many white males there are in the US who are part of the cis-hetero-patriarchy. There are also concerns about how ethnic studies approaches economics, since capitalism is framed as a system of power alongside white supremacy and patriarchy. What is capitalism? The glossary explains that capitalism is a system where native people and people of color are disproportionately exploited. But shouldn't students also be exposed to the ways in which capitalism and free markets have benefited the US economy and created a higher standard of living? I mean, only capitalism could have brought us such treasures as the affordable automobile, the home air conditioner, and the one item I could never live without, the McRib. But if a student argued that capitalism has created the most wealth for the most number of people, would that even be allowed? Opponents say this latest effort in California is a product of academia's emphasis on identity politics and our current political climate. And in a way, Ravi Perry, the president of the National Association of Ethnic Studies, kind of agrees. he blames it on the president, saying the push for more ethnic studies has gained momentum, frankly, with the election of Donald Trump. Wait a second. The bill that sparked this whole ethnic studies curriculum was passed in September 2016, when President Hillary Clinton was a sure thing. But supporters of these ethnic studies programs say that with Trump as president, the courses are needed more than ever, amid what they perceive as our nation's growing anti-immigrant climate and increasing racial tensions. Of course, some would argue that what is seen as an anti-immigrant climate is just anti-illegal immigration, with the U.S. government trying to stop people from crossing the border without permission. But would any student in this ethnic studies course dare to take that side of the argument? And that's the biggest criticism of the proposed curriculum from Evers, the guy from Bush's education department, that it tends to emphasize one side of an issue, stating it as fact and not leaving room for debate. This plan, as it's being presented, is simply training students to become ideological activists and proponents of identity politics. And in case you think that's just because he's a conservative, again, it's pretty much the same criticism that the LA Times editorial board has about the curriculum. It talks about critical thinking, but usually offers one side and one side only. Well, that actually has to do with the definition of critical thinking explained in the introduction. In this course, critical thinking is less of a way for kids to use logic and information to form a conclusion, and more of an examination of the levels of power so students can speak out on social issues. If you want to take a closer look at California's proposal, the draft is available online here. The public comment period goes until August 15th. Then an amended proposal will be voted on in early 2020. And if approved, the plan would begin in the 2023 school year. Although again, the curriculum would be a guide and not the specific one that all school districts would have to implement word for word. And if you decide to read through the 300 plus pages of the proposal, make sure to reference the glossary in case there's any words you can't pronounce, like herstory. It means history, but obviously you can't say history or you're part of the cis-hetero-patriarchy. What's that, Shelley? The root word for history comes from ancient Greek and has nothing to do with gender? I always knew you were part of the patriarchy. So what do you think about California's latest push for mandatory ethnic studies in schools? Is it a way to expand young minds or a veiled effort at indoctrination? Leave your comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. So visit patreon.com/America Uncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making this show. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.